The world did not end in total cleanliness. When the black waters finally receded, revealing a silent, mud-drenched planet, ancient traditions imagine that one colossal survivor remained a solitary titan standing between the bones of a drowned civilization and the fragile dawn of a new human era. His name was Og. Listen. Not to a voice. To the absence of one. There is a sound the earth makes after a great drowning. It is the sound of water letting go. A slow, rhythmic lapping against new mud. A planet exhaling for the first time in 40 days. And in that gray, endless quiet, something moves that should not exist anymore. A shadow falls across the mudflats. It is too long. Too wide. The shape of a man. But wrong in every measurement that matters. He is the last of his kind. And he knows it. For weeks now, maybe months, he has walked a world wiped clean of everyone he ever knew. The cities are gone. The towers are gone. The voices that once spoke his language, that once stood at his height and looked him in the eye, gone. All of it. Beneath the silt. What does a giant do when there are no more giants? Where does a king go when the kingdom has been erased not by an enemy, but by the sky itself? Think about the loneliest you have ever felt. Now take away every other living soul. Take away the houses, the roads, the distant lights of a city on the horizon. Take away even the certainty that anyone, anywhere, shares your language. That is the morning this creature woke into. This is the story they tried to bury twice. Once beneath the flood, and once beneath the silence of the texts that refused to explain him. His bed was made of iron. It measured 9 cubits long. And for 3,000 years, no one has been able to agree on how he was still breathing. We are taught to picture the flood as an ending. The rain stops. The dove returns. The rainbow arches over a clean and quiet earth. And the story closes like a book. But endings are never that tidy. Something always survives the fire. Something always crawls out of the water. And what survives is rarely what we would have chosen to save. Tonight we are not going to talk about the man on the boat. We are going to talk about the one they left in the water. The one the texts mention, then flinch away from. The one whose only monument is a bed too large for any human grave. This is the story of the last Titan. And it begins not with a roar but with the silence of a world that has run out of his kind. Let us begin where the record actually lets us stand. On solid ground. On a single sentence that survived everything. Buried in the 3rd chapter of Deuteronomy, in a passage that reads almost like an afterthought, is one of the strangest pieces of physical inventory in the entire Hebrew Bible. The text states it plainly. Only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. His bed was decorated with iron. It was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Read that again. Slowly. Because the writer is doing something very specific here. He is not telling you a fairy tale. He is giving you a measurement. He is pointing at an object. He is saying in effect, you do not have to believe me. Go and look. The bed is in Rabbah. It is still there. Count the cubits yourself. 9 cubits by 4. By the most common ancient reckoning. That is roughly 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. A bed the size of a small room. A frame of iron in an age when iron was rare, precious, and almost mythic in its own right. And think about why the writer reached for iron. Of all materials. Wood rods. Cloth rods. Flesh and bone return to the dust within a generation. But iron endures. Iron is the one thing a man can leave behind that outlasts the man. By telling us the bed was iron, the text is telling us, in its quiet way, that this object was meant to survive. That it did survive. That a piece of the old world had hardened into something the flood could not dissolve. It is the detail of a writer who wants you to believe him. And whether or not the bed was real, that instinct is real. The instinct to point at something solid and say the past was here. It left a mark. You can still measure it. And here is the detail that scholars have circled for centuries. The text does not call Og a monster. It calls him a remnant. That single word choice changes everything. A monster is a thing you fear. A remnant is a thing you mourn. The writer could have reached for a word that made your skin crawl. Instead he reached for a word that aches. A remnant is what is left over. The last coin in an empty purse. The final name on a list where every other name has been crossed out. The word itself carries grief inside it. Og was the last of the Rephaim. And who are the Rephaim? In the layered memory of the ancient Near East, they were the old giants. The ones whose era had already ended. Even in the world of the Bible, they were treated as the people who came before a vanished race whose ruins outlived their bones. So we have to be careful here. Precise. Because this is where legend and history press against each other like two hands on the same door. What the surviving texts give us is not a documentary account of a 13-foot man. What they give us is something more interesting. A people who looked at the past and felt the weight of something enormous standing behind them. A memory of largeness. A king who functioned, in their imagination, as a bridge linking the world before some great catastrophe to the world that came after. And that is the riddle that has traveled across 3,000 years of Near Eastern memory. Not how tall was he? But why did they remember him at all? Why does a single bed, measured once, in a sentence almost thrown away, refuse to stop haunting us? Because some objects are too large to forget. And some men become the last door to a world that no longer has any other way home. Consider what the writer chose to preserve. Of an entire vanished people, their kings, their wars, their gods, their grief, almost nothing survived the long erosion of time. The names are gone. The cities are gone. The languages they spoke have dissolved into dust and guesswork. And yet one thing was saved. A bed. An object of rest. Not a weapon, not a crown, not a monument to conquest. A place where a tired body once lay down. There is something almost unbearably human in that. Strip away the size, the iron, the mystery, and what you are left with is a single fact. Even the last of the giants needed somewhere to sleep. And when the measuring was done, when the cubits were counted and the sentence was written, the scribe moved on. The Bible does not linger. It states the size of the bed and lets the silence do the rest. But we are not going to move on so quickly, because that silence is exactly where the real story has been hiding all along. Now we step away from the solid ground, and we walk out onto the thin ice of legend. I want to be honest with you before we do, because this is exactly the place where most tellings of this story go wrong. What follows is not history. It is something else. It is the sound a civilization makes when it is trying to solve a problem it cannot solve. I want to slow down here, because this is the most misunderstood part of the whole story. People hear these legends and they split into two camps. One camp says, see, it is all literally true. The giant really rode the ark. The other camp says it is all nonsense. Throw the whole thing out. And both camps miss the point entirely. A legend is not a lie. A legend is a fingerprint. It is the mark left behind by a hand that is long since gone. You do not ask whether a fingerprint is true. You ask who left it, and why, and what they were reaching for. That is how we are going to listen tonight. Here is the problem the ancient storytellers faced. Their tradition held two things to be true at once. First, that a great flood had cleansed the entire world, sparing only those aboard a single vessel. And second, that giants the Rephaim, the descendants of an older order, were somehow still present in the land of Canaan long after the waters had gone. Both of these could not be true. Not cleanly. If the flood erased everything, how did the giants get to the other side of it? A lesser tradition would have simply ignored the contradiction. But the ancient mind did not like a loose thread. So the storytellers did what storytellers have always done. They built a bridge across the gap. And the bridge they built was Og. The rabbinic legends are extraordinary. And I want to stress these are legends. Later traditions. Imaginative attempts to reconcile a theological knot. Not eyewitness reports. In some of these tales, Og does not drown because Og does not go under. He clings to the outside of the great ark. He rides the storm on the roof of the very vessel meant to outlast his entire species. Noah, in some versions, passes food out to him through a hole in the side. The last giant, fed by the man chosen to replace his world. Sit with that image for a moment. The smallness of it. The strangeness of it. The chosen survivor of the new world, handing scraps through a window to the last survivor of the old one. Two species. One storm. One thin wall of wood between the future and the past. In other versions, the water simply does not reach him. He is so vast that the flood that drowns mountains rises only to his ankles. He wades through the end of the world the way a man wades through a shallow stream. And there is a darker reading, too. One the gentler tellings leave out. In some traditions, the survival of Og is not a mercy at all. It is a threat held in reserve. The old evil was not fully washed away. A seed of the former world slipped through the net of the flood, and from that seed, the giants of Canaan would one day grow again. The catastrophe was meant to be total, and it failed because of him. That is a story about something we all secretly fear. That you cannot truly start over. That no flood is ever complete. That the past always keeps one foot on the deck of the new world, refusing to drown. These stories are not trying to be true. They are trying to make sense. That is a different thing entirely. Think about what the storytellers were actually doing. They had inherited a memory of giants in the land. They had inherited a memory of a world washed clean. And they could not let either memory die. So they performed a kind of surgery on time itself. They stitched the two eras together with the body of one impossible man. And this tells us something true even if the story is not. It tells us that ancient people experienced the past as something physically present. The giants were not gone. They were under the soil, in the ruins, in the oversized stones that no ordinary hand could have lifted. When you cannot explain the size of the world you have inherited, you invent someone large enough to have built it. That is not foolishness. That is the human mind doing exactly what it was made to do, reaching for a story big enough to hold the evidence. And the storytellers gave that story a face. Not a vague terror. A specific man, with a name, a kingdom, and a bed. They took the abstract weight of the past and pressed it into a single, walking shape. That is the genius of the old traditions. They never deal in concepts. They deal in bodies. They make you feel the weight of history by making history something you could, in theory, shake hands with if your hand were large enough to reach. So no. Og did not ride the ark. Almost certainly, there was no 13-foot king clinging to the roof in the rain. But the legend is a fossil of something real. It is the cast left behind by a vanished fear. And fear like that does not survive 3,000 years unless it once stood for something. And notice what the storytellers refused to do. They never let Og win. In every version, he is not the hero of the flood. He is the leftover. The exception that proves the rule. The thing that should have died with everyone else, and somehow through cunning, or size, or the strange mercy of a man handing food through a window did not. There is a quiet cruelty in that. To survive everything, and to be remembered only as the one who should not have. To be the footnote to someone else's salvation. I have come to think the ancient mind understood something we have nearly forgotten. That survival is not always a reward. Sometimes it is the heaviest punishment a story can hand out. Sometimes the cruelest thing the flood can do to a man is let him live. Hold on to that thought. Because we are about to leave the world of legend entirely. We are about to go to a place where the giants left something behind that no rabbi invented and no scribe imagined. Something you can touch. Now stop. Forget the legends. Forget the ark and the rooftop and the giant and the rain. Because there is something in the land of Bashan that is not a story. It is not a metaphor. It is not a contradiction the rabbis were trying to solve. It is stone. And you can stand on it today. High in the Golan Heights, On a windswept plateau of black volcanic rock, there is a structure that should not be there. From the ground, it looks like nothing. A field of scattered basalt. Gray-black stones, half swallowed by grass, stretching out under a hard sky. For thousands of years, the shepherds who crossed this plateau walked right past it and saw only rubble. And then, in the last century, someone looked down from above, from the air, and the rubble revealed its secret. It is a wheel. An enormous wheel of stone. 5 concentric rings, rippling outward from a central cairn, the whole thing more than 500 feet across. Tens of thousands of tons of black basalt, hauled and stacked and arranged with deliberate, patient intent. The Arabs who lived nearby called it Rouge Meliri. The Hebrew name is older and stranger. Gilgal-Rephaim. The Wheel of the Giants. Archaeologists believe the oldest rings may have been laid down more than 5,000 years ago. 5,000 years. That means the wheel was already ancient, already a mystery, already abandoned long before the first words of the Bible were ever written down. The people who told the story of Og did not build it either. They inherited it, exactly as we have. They stood where you might stand today and ask the same question we ask. Who? And the silence answered them the only way silence ever does. It gave them room to imagine. Listen to that name again. The Wheel of the Giants. The people who named it did not say the Wheel of the Ancients, or the Wheel of the Kings, or the Wheel of the Builders. They reached for one word: giants. Why? Because when human beings of a later age came upon these stones, they did the only honest thing their minds could do. They measured the work against their own hands. And their own hands fell short. No one knew who built it. No one knew why. The purpose of Gilgal-Rephaim is still argued over by serious archaeologists today. A calendar, a tomb, a place of ritual, a map of the heavens written in rock. The truth is, after all our science, we still do not fully know. But the ancient people did not have our patience for mystery. They had ruins they could not explain, in a land their own traditions had already filled with the memory of giants. And so the two things fused. The unexplained stones became the work of the last great king. The wheel became Og's wheel. The plateau became the floor of a vanished palace. This is the part that should send a chill through you. Not the legend. The mechanism behind it. Because we still do this. Every one of us. When we stand before something too large to comprehend, a thing built by hands we cannot imagine, we reach for a name big enough to carry the weight. We did it at Stonehenge. We did it at the pyramids. We do it every time we look at something old and impossible and whisper, who could have made this? The giants of Bashan were not invented out of nothing. They were summoned out of stone. The evidence came first. The myth came to explain it. And there is a strange comfort in understanding that. Because it means the ancient people were not simply gullible. They were doing science the only way they knew how. They had data they could not account for, and they built the best theory their world allowed. We would later call it myth. To them, It was the most reasonable explanation available for a genuine physical mystery sitting right there on the plateau. We have better tools now. But we are not so different. We still stand in front of the great unexplained things and feel that ancient pull, the need for the story to be bigger than ourselves. And somewhere on that black plateau, under that hard sky, the real answer is still lying there. Patient. Silent. Older than every story we ever told about it. Walk the rings yourself, if you ever get the chance. Run your hand along the basalt. The stone is cold even in the summer heat, and it is heavy in a way that humbles the body. A single block can outweigh a man many times over. And there are thousands of them. Thousands. Someone moved each one. By hand. Without wheels. Without machines. Without any of the easy answers we like to reach for. They moved them up onto a high and difficult plateau, and they laid them out on a pattern so precise that you cannot even see it from the ground. Whoever did this was not playing. This was not idle work. This was a people pouring decades, maybe generations of labor into a single, enormous idea. And then they vanished, and took the idea with them, and left only the stones. Is it any wonder that a later age looked at this and thought of giants? When you find the work of a forgotten people, you do not see ordinary hands. You see something larger than yourself. You feel the gap between what you could build and what was built, and into that gap, the imagination pours a giant. The myth did not create the stones. The stones created the myth. And that distinction is everything. Let us go back to him now. The figure at the center of all this. Not the monster of the legends. Not the builder of the wheel. But the idea of him. The last one. Because here is what the texts and the traditions, taken together, are really circling. They are circling a single, almost unbearable condition. What does it mean to be the final survivor of a world that no longer exists? Imagine it honestly. Not the size. Not the iron bed. Imagine the inside of it. We spend the whole story looking at him from the outside. The height. The shadow. The bed we could measure. But the texts keep circling back to something the eye cannot see. What it was like to be him. What it cost. Ugh. In the imagination of these traditions, is the last living container of an entire age. He remembers the world before the catastrophe. He remembers the descent of the Watchers, the names of the fallen, the secrets that were taught and were never supposed to be taught. He remembers the screams of his own slaughtered kin, the towers that fell, the language no living mouth still speaks. And there is no one left to tell. That is the true horror of the story. Not that he is large. That he is alone in a way no human being has ever been alone. Every memory he carries is a memory only he carries. When he dies, an entire world dies a second time quietly, completely, with no one to even notice it is gone. We have a small word for a thing like this. We call it an anachronism. Something that has outlived its own time. A creature still walking the earth after the earth has moved on without it. But that clean little word does not capture the weight of it. So let me put it the way the story puts it. Og is a man holding a library that no one else can read, walking through a country that has no word for what he is. And I think this is why the story refuses to die. I think this is the real reason it survived the flood and the silence and the 3,000 years. Because every one of us, eventually, becomes a little like Og. We all outlive something. A friendship. A place. A version of the world that felt permanent right up until the morning it was gone. We all end up, sooner or later, as the last person who remembers a certain laugh, a certain street, a certain way things used to be. We carry rooms inside us that no one else can ever enter. That is the solitude of survival. It is not the pain of dying. It is the stranger pain of being left. And we should be careful not to soften it. We like our survivors to be triumphant. We build statues to the ones who made it through. But the texts are wiser than our statues. They know that to be the last is not the same as to be the victor. The last one standing is also the last one grieving. He has won nothing. He has simply been the slowest to fall. There is an old and quiet truth buried in this. The people who tell the story are not the people the story was about. By the time anyone wrote Og down, his world was already 1,000 years gone. We do not remember the giants. We remember the rumor of the giants. We remember the memory of a memory, worn smooth by repetition, like a stone in a river. And one day, someone will remember us the same way. A name. A measurement. A single object that happened to survive. The shape of a life flattened into a sentence in someone else's book. And here the story asks its hardest question. Is the memory a gift? Or is it a sentence? Is it a mercy to be the one who remembers, the keeper of the flame, the last witness who will not let the world forget? Or is it a curse, to carry a weight that gets heavier with every year, while the people who could have shared it slip one by one beneath the silt? The texts do not answer this. They are too honest to answer it. They simply set the giant down in the middle of an empty world and let us watch him walk. A legacy is a fragile thing. It survives only as long as someone is left who understands it. And when the whole ecosystem that gave a life its meaning has vanished into the dark, the survivor does not become a hero. He becomes a monument. A living statue of a dead age, still breathing, still walking, with no one left to read the inscription. That is what was waiting for the last titan on the far side of the flood. Not a kingdom. Not a throne. A silence shaped exactly like everything he had lost. And maybe that is why the iron bed matters so much. Maybe that is why, of all the things that could have survived, the text saved that one detail. Because a bed is where a person is most alone. It is where the day ends and the mind goes quiet and there is no one left to perform for, no kingdom to rule, no enemy to face. Just a body, and a darkness, and the weight of everything it remembers. Picture him lying there. 13 feet of exhausted history on a frame of cold iron. Staring up into a dark that holds no familiar face. Listening for voices in his own language that will never come again. The last man on earth who knows what the old world sounded like before the water took it. We think of giants as powerful. But there is no power in that room. There is only memory, and the unbearable arithmetic of it, one mind, holding everything, with no one to hand it to. And the question hangs in the dark above him, the same question that hangs above all of us in the end. When the last person who remembers is gone, did any of it ever happen at all? And so he walked south, the traditions tell us, down from the Black Plateau, away from the Wheel of Stones, toward the green and unsuspecting plains of Canaan. A single, immense shadow moving across a land that did not yet know his name. He was carrying the last of the old world into the first of the new one. And he did not come in peace, and he did not come in war. He came simply because there was nowhere else for a thing like him to go. Imagine the people who first saw him on the horizon. A shape that grew, and kept growing, long after it should have resolved into an ordinary man. The slow dawning of a fear older than their grandparents. They had heard the stories. Every people has the stories. And now one of the stories was walking toward their fields in the failing light. They would not have known whether to bow, or run, or fall to their knees. And honestly, neither would we. The era of the giants was over. But its shadow had one more journey to make. Somewhere ahead of him, on those southern plains, a new people would one day arrive. And they would look up at the last Titan the way we look up at the Wheel of Stones, with awe, with fear, and with a terrible certainty that the world was older and stranger than they had been told. But that is a story for another time. That is where the next era begins. For now, the last giant walks alone. And the question he carries is the same one he leaves with you. He is every memory that has no one left to share it. He is the photograph of a face that nobody alive can name. He is the language spoken now by only one mouth in all the world. We made him 13 feet tall. But the truth is, we have all met him. We have all, in some small way, been him. So tell me in the comments honestly, if you were the last survivor of a completely erased world. Is it a mercy to carry the memory of that lost civilization, or is it a curse to live in a reality that no longer has room for your kind? I want to read your thoughts below. To step into the untamed wilderness of Canaan, and watch the shadows of the ancient titans rise once more from the earth. Subscribe. The next era has just begun.
Enter the realm of divine secrets. Welcome to Bible Confidential.